Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a truly fascinating geopolitical story. We're looking at how a remarkably small nation, perched right on the crossroads of colliding empires, managed to survive centuries of foreign domination and constant threats to become one of the world's leading modern digital pioneers. It's an incredible story of survival, adaptation, and just an unbreakable cultural will. Let's get right into it.
Right off the bat, I want you to consider this central question. How does a nation survive erasure? Because when we look at the source material, Estonia's history isn't just some dry textbook list of dates and facts. No, it reads like a continuous, highly dramatic struggle against the absolute monster of foreign erasure. I mean, time and time again, the map of Europe was redrawn, and larger powers literally trying to wipe this identity off the map completely.
And to really understand that level of resilience, we have to look back a staggering 11,000 years. Yeah, that's how far back prehistory in this region extends, following the retreat of the continental ice sheets. From the very beginning, survival here required building defenses. We're going to be exploring a recurring fortress metaphor today. Early Estonians actually built physical hill forts, like the ancient Temnikava mountain fortress, just to protect themselves from hostile neighbors. Keep that in mind, because as you'll see later on, they are still building fortresses today. They just look very, very different.
Section 1. Crossroads of the North. Okay, let's dive into this.
To understand why this land was constantly fought over, we have to look at the map. Geography really is destiny here, and the contrast is just staggering. Back in the 13th century, historical records actually described parts of this land as the Black Val. It was this mysterious, unnamed region of impossible marshes, sunken swamps, and deep, dark forests inhabited by early Uralic Finns. It was a rugged, isolated frontier. Yet today, that exact same territory is the ultimate hyper-connected digital cloud, globally renowned for its seamless e-state infrastructure. Talk about a glow-up, right?
So what made it such a lucrative target? Well, it sits right on the eastern fringes of Europe, literally bridging east and west. It boasts over 3,700 kilometers of coastline, and this is wild, nearly 1,500 islands, heavily dominating the Gulf of Finland. Whether you are an ancient hunter-gatherer looking for fertile ground or a Viking prince trying to control lucrative coastal trade routes, this geography was the absolute grand prize of the North.
Section 2. Centuries of Foreign Rule.
Let's move to Estia and see how this built, because since this land was the grand prize, the native people quickly found themselves trapped on what we can only really call a carousel of empires. In 1219, Danish King Valdemar II swoops in, capturing fortresses and bringing Christianity by the sword. Then by 1385, the powerful merchants of Lübeck pull the region into the Hanseatic League to monopolize trade. Fast forward to 1629, the Swedes take control of Livonia, and finally by 1721, following the Great Northern War, the territory gets swallowed up by the vast Russian Empire. The land literally just traded hands from one king or czar to the next. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the unintended consequences of foreign occupation. The Swedes, hoping to homogenize and better administer their new province, implemented some sweeping reforms. They established the University of Tartu in 1632 and actively promoted literacy by allowing the publication of the first Estonian Bible. So, despite being an occupied peasant class, the Estonians were accidentally handed the ultimate tools for their own cultural preservation: reading, writing, and a unified language. And that cultural foundation was absolutely crucial when the Russian Empire took over in 1721. Under Russian autocracy, you had a Baltic German elite maintaining fierce local control over the largely peasant Estonian population. But a massive game-changing shift happened when serfdom was officially abolished in 1816. I mean, imagine finally having the right to choose where you live. This granted the Estonian people micro-mobility. For the first time, they could actually move, start businesses in towns, and begin to form a true independent middle class.
Section 3. Awakening and First Independence.
With physical resistance against the Tsar basically impossible, the Estonian people turned to their ultimate weapon of survival: their culture. Just listen to this libretto from an early Estonian language opera. I love my native land, and I warm it with the tears of my heart and the blood of my veins. Wow. During this 19th century national awakening, intellectuals realized that to be a true nation, you needed a national narrative. So Friedrich Reinhold Kreutzwald penned the great epic, the Kalevipoeg. There was this absolute explosion of native language journalism, poetry, and choral singing. They were quite literally singing their identity into existence.
And all of that cultural awakening eventually bore political fruit. When the Russian Empire collapsed during the sheer chaos of World War I, the Estonian provisional government seized their moment. They officially declared independence on February 24, 1918, They capitalized on the German armistice, actually fought a war to secure their borders, and validated their statehood with the 1920 Treaty of Tartu. So for the very first time in centuries, Estonians had their own democratic constitution and experienced a brief but incredibly prosperous period of interwar independence.
Section 4, Occupations and the Singing Revolution.
Tragically, geopolitics just would not leave them alone. As the dark clouds of totalitarianism gathered over Europe, a very grim sequence of events unfolded. In 1940, the Soviet Union occupied the country, enforcing forced collectivization and severe political purges. Just a year later, Nazi Germany invaded. And during this period, the very small pre-war Jewish population of about 4,400 was targeted. Tragically, most were killed or forced to flee, leaving only around 400 survivors. Then, in 1944, Soviet forces returned. And to completely crush any remaining resistance, the Soviets deported roughly a fifth of the entire Estonian population to remote camps in Siberia. The Iron Curtain had officially fallen over the Baltic.
So how do you fight a superpower? Well, you go right back to your roots. So the crucial point is, in what became known as the Singing Revolution, they didn't resort to violence. Instead, hundreds of thousands of people gathered at massive events, like the 1988 Song Festival, to simply stand side by side and sing banned national songs. They defied Moscow entirely through the overwhelming unified power of their cultural voice. It's honestly incredibly powerful. And those voices were absolutely heard. On August 20, 1991, amidst the final collapse of the Soviet Union, Estonia officially restored its independence. International recognition flooded in almost immediately, starting with nations like France and Iceland, and by September, they had officially applied for United Nations membership. Against all odds, the state was reborn.
Section 5. The Modern Digital Fortress.
Now, declaring independence is one thing. Actually keeping it in the modern world is quite another. And this brilliantly illustrates the complex demographic legacy left by the 50-year Soviet occupation. Out of a relatively small population, there were nearly 300,000 stateless ethnic Russian speakers. This obviously created some significant internal security anxieties for the newly independent government, who feared that this disenfranchisement could potentially make that population vulnerable to foreign influence or espionage down the line. Economically speaking, they employed what's called shock economics to instantly convert their centrally planned system over to a Western capitalist one. And it worked incredibly well at first, bringing rapid prosperity and high inflation. Look at the boom of 2007, a massive 7% GDP growth. But tying themselves to the global market also meant vulnerability. When the recession hit all of us in the late 2000s, Estonia's growth absolutely plummeted to near zero by 2009. It was a really harsh lesson in global interconnectivity.
To guarantee that the dreaded carousel of empires would never restart, Estonia aggressively sought out Western alliances. They fully integrated into the European Union and the OSCE. But the real, ultimate insurance policy was NATO. They linked their air surveillance directly to NATO control and commit a robust 2.33% of their GDP to defense spending, which is actually one of the highest rates in the entire alliance. They were determined to never, ever face erasure again.
But, as we know, the nature of warfare was fundamentally changing. In 2007, a localized domestic dispute over the relocation of a Soviet war memorial in Tallinn triggered a devastating, month-long digital siege. Massive cyber attacks crippled banks, government ministries, and major media outlets. It was an enormous wake-up call. The threat wasn't just physical tanks anymore. It was coming straight through the very cables that connected them to the outside world.
Which brings our entire story full circle. In response to those 2007 attacks, Estonia completely rebuilt its defenses, but this time not with stone, but with code. They became a world-leading e-state, backing all their state services on the most secure, two-layer cyberspace structures possible. The ancient Temnikamon fortress has essentially been replaced by impenetrable cloud infrastructure. And it's so deeply ingrained in their culture now that during the 2020 lockdown, thousands of people gathered to sing a brand new song at their digital festival. The title of the song? My Heart is a Fortress.
It's an absolutely incredible evolution, going from impassable bogs to impassable firewalls. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative question. In an age of borderless cyber warfare, is a digital fortress really the only way for small nations to guarantee their sovereignty? It's a question that honestly goes far beyond just the Baltics. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you walk away today with a deeper understanding of how history, geography, and an unbreakable cultural will can forge a resilient nation. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.